My name is Ian Marshall, and I'm the Associate Dean in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the first dialogue in our series, Democracy Dialogues. This series evolved out of the teach-in our college organized last month in response to the assault on the nation's capital this past January. The teach-in provided the William Paterson University community valuable tools to understand that watershed moment in our nation's history. Through the disciplinary expertise of the professors who presented that day, many questions were answered, yet many more remain. Several students, faculty members, and staff recognized the importance of continuing the dialogue around the state of democracy that teach-in inspired. We are pleased then that this joint venture between the College of Arts and Communication and the College of Humanities and Social Sciences is the result, and that it brings faculty, students, staff, and indeed our wider community together in dialogues on democracy. I'd like to hand the proceedings over to our host for this evening, but before I do that, I'd like to thank Professor Dewar MacLeod and the other members of the organizing committee for this series, Professors Lucia Munguia, Nicholas Hirshon, and Daniel Wallace. I'd also like to thank James Miles and Tia Cherry for their exceptional technical and organizational assistance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Professor Munguia, our host for this evening's dialogue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marshall. That was a wonderful introduction to the series. This evening, we will be hearing from two representatives of our William Paterson community, Dr. Dewar MacLeod and Dr. Nicholas Hirshon, who are representing the Department of History and Communication respectively. Our first dialogue to kick off the series is going to be very poignant, obviously, from my perspective, but also from many of your perspectives. As users of social media, consumers of information through news sources, it is not a day that goes by that we do not think about our relationship to the concept of truth and true information. And so these two professors are here to raise a discussion about the two angles from which we see truth being assaulted in our popular culture, society, and in the media that is not tied to necessarily official sources of information. And so we are really going to explore with them together this question of what the state of democracy is going to look like when two fundamental pillars of it are at threat: the educated society and populace, and on the other hand, a free press. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Nicholas Hirshon, I believe, is going first, right? Or is it?
I can go first if you want. I can totally go first.
Go ahead, fine. Nick. Go ahead. Take it away.
Nick.
Okay. Yeah, I will take charge first. Thank you very much.
This is our first event, so you'll have to bear with us. We're all very excited to
You had one job
with you.
She did a great job. No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, including my own students for tonight, who didn't know about this until a few minutes ago. So pleasant surprise. But I'm going to be showing you this presentation. So let's see. Oh, actually, I probably did that. Did I do that the wrong way there? Yeah. Okay. Can you all see the full screen there with the presentation then? On news, information, and the future of democracy. And I want to start out by talking about journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who I know some of our panelists will be familiar with, but I don't know if all of the students who are in attendance will. So as I kind of enter this discussion, I want to introduce what happened to him and how that feeds into this idea of the importance of truth telling and the people who are trying to chill that, which is really scary and that we want to attack. So I'm going to play this video, recent news report, to catch you up to date.
Jamal Khashoggi entered the Saudi consulate in Turkey in October 2018 while his fiancée waited outside. Inside, he was brutally murdered and dismembered by a 15-member hit squad flown in from Saudi Arabia. A U.S. intelligence report said it included members of the elite personal protective detail for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom the U.S. assesses personally approved the kill or capture mission.
Did you order the murder of Jamal Khashoggi?
In his only TV interview, when pressed by Nora for 60 Minutes, the Crown Prince denied ordering the killing, but said he took responsibility as leader of the kingdom. But U.S. intelligence said the Crown Prince has absolute control of the security forces, viewed Khashoggi as a threat, and broadly supported using violent measures if necessary to silence him.
How did you not know about this operation?
Some think that I should know what 3 million people working for the Saudi government do daily. It's impossible that the 3 million would send their daily reports to the leader or the second highest person in the Saudi government.
The Trump administration sanctioned 17 Saudi officials in 2018, but did not punish the Crown Prince for his role.
Mr. President!
President Biden also avoided action against the heir to the throne of this key U.S. ally. Mr. Biden did sanction the operation's ringleader and the Crown Prince's security squad. Is this justice?
It's the beginning of accountability, but I hope the administration goes further with repercussions for all of those involved, including the Crown Prince.
Congressman Schiff is urging the administration to go after the prince's personal financial assets, including the plane used to fly the killers to the scene of the crime.
Sorry, I was saving the video from my last class there.
The president chose a more diplomatic option, blocking foreign nationals from the U.S. if they persecute journalists or activists. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia flatly rejects the intelligence report. For CBS This Morning, Saturday, I'm Margaret Brennan, Washington.
So I don't know how familiar everyone here was with Jamal Khashoggi, but I think it's one of those incidents that highlights the importance of news and information. And again, how many people across the world are committed to the truth not coming out, to trying to chill the release of that information. I'll just introduce for some of you who don't know me. My background is, grew up in New York City, was a reporter for 6 years for the New York Daily News, went to the Columbia Journalism School, got my PhD at a journalism school, and obviously now teaching William Patterson journalism since 2016. This is critical to the foundation of everything that I teach, right? If journalists can't feel safe in what they're doing, then will they ever try to investigate? And so we're very closely paying attention to what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. We're delighted that the Biden administration finally released this intelligence report, but we're also kind of pushing for some sort of a sanction or some sort of penalty to be paid to show the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, right? You cannot just get away with this. You cannot, strike fear into journalists. So just some quick notes to follow up on that. The Society of Professional Journalists, of which I'm a member and I'm the campus advisor here at William Patterson, SPJ put out this tweet just a few days ago saying they're frustrated and fed up with government agencies worldwide targeting and arresting reporters for covering news. They put this hashtag, journalism is not a crime. I encourage all of the students here later, or if you want to do it on the side right now, look at that hashtag, journalism is not a crime. See how many people around the world have been tweeting out times that they themselves as a journalist felt that they were attacked, or journalism professors going through examples throughout history. And I also want to kind of point out that when I was in journalism school, we often heard about these things happening in other countries, and we might dismiss this as a third world problem, so to speak. Still very important, but this couldn't possibly happen here in the United States. We have a constitution that gives us freedom of the press, freedom of speech. This is not an American problem, but it has become one in recent years. So in the United States, at least 4 journalists have court dates this month alone after being arrested last summer covering Black Lives Matter protests. And the Society of Professional Journalists put out this statement saying, "We are appalled that American journalists continue to face charges and court dates for doing this public service," right? You can understand that chilling effect we talk about in journalism all the time. If you are just trying to cover a protest, but you're confused being a protester, police can say that later on, but these journalists were clearly identifying themselves. They had ID cards, they were screaming, "We're reporters just covering it." It's something that gives other future journalists, the young journalists I have in my class tonight, pause into thinking whether they should really fight to get a story. And then this goes to the idea of, well, what's the purpose of the press in a democracy? So we often view it as one of the key pillars, and you see here this cartoon that I have, editorial cartoon, the key pillars of democracy, and one of them is the newspapers that are falling down. We sometimes refer to the press as the fourth estate. So what does the fourth estate mean? Well, the first 3 estates in Europe were the clergy, nobility, and commoners, but then realizing that the press plays an important role, even if it's unofficial, in reporting the news and having a palpable political influence, right? You can't deny the kind of influence when we report things and we shame politicians into action and just cover their misdeeds, how important that can be, the kind of work that Jamal Khashoggi was unfortunately killed for. People worldwide need to be kept up to date with more journalism, not less. I think we've all seen this so much now with the pandemic, when so many of us are stuck at home, scared, intimidated by the world outside, not knowing what's going on. We need journalists to go out there and get that for us. We don't want to have any obstacles for them getting it. And lastly, they need to, of course, report safely without fear of the reprisal that we're seeing, whether that is death or arrest. So just a few cartoons that I kind of dug up that show the importance of the press's role. You see there the 3 branches of government, right? The executive branch on the left with the White House, the Capitol building with the legislative branch, the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. But you see that solitary reporter standing there showing he's taking his notes, he or she, and they're reporting on the government. That is the fourth estate. That is just equally as important, even if it's a smaller figure compared to those intimidating buildings. Another one here showing the flow of disinformation and fake news. I know Dr. McLeod's going to talk about this in a minute, but seeing the propaganda conspiracy theories, and they have Joe Biden's favorite word, malarkey, over there on the left. And how journalism is kind of the dam here, right? That you see that is cracking. It's trying to contain all this misinformation, but there's only so much that it is built to take. And when it cracks and it overflows down there to the public, to the news consumers, how much of a challenge that's going to be. A final one for you here, depicting our former president, President Trump, as a tank here, shooting fake news accusations again and again into this pillar of the fourth estate of journalism. And that eventually, by repeating that claim that they're fake news, fake news, fake news, it ruins the public's trust in us, right? And then they might think, well, why do we need to worry about protecting journalists? Aren't they all dishonest? That's what the President of the United States has been telling us. A few other quick points before I wrap up here. So locally, because I want to bring this to what's happening here, it's not, again, just a third world problem. It is happening here in the United States. Last year, before the pandemic hit, so that's 2, right? In 2019, we had on campus the journalist here, Isaac Avusea from the Trentonian newspaper. He and his editor, John Berry, won an award from the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists called Courage Under Fire. The mayor of Trenton had accused Isaac, who's pictured there standing next to me in Hamilton Hall, accused Isaac of essentially burglarizing his office, stealing materials, said that he was a suspect. Then he denied it, but the mayor's chief of staff was caught on a police body camera saying it. And so then Isaac was recognized with this award because his editor kept him on the beat. He kept plowing through. He's had a lot of run-ins with government officials there. And that's another chilling effect. So in the last 30 years, just to kind of wrap up with some statistics, unfortunately, 1,400 journalists in the last 40 years have been killed across the globe, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. That's what CPJ stands for here. If you go to their website, you'll find lots of unfortunate but interesting data about how this is happening. And again, to bring it home, 11 have been killed in the United States. That's, significant for us, and some of them very recently. 2015, some of you may have seen this video of 2 journalists for a TV affiliate in Virginia who were fatally shot while conducting a live interview by a former reporter who had been fired. Chilling stuff that you can watch. And again, journalists just out there doing a regular interview, regular day, all of a sudden killed for the reason being where they work. And another more recent incident in 2018, 4 reporters were killed at the Capital Gazette, a newspaper in Maryland, by a man who had previously sued them for defamation. So it's pretty clear he's committing this attack because of the journalism they've produced. It wasn't just a random attack, right? It's geared at journalists. So those are things that are happening just in our country. And then just to bring it, last slide here, up to what's happening even today, this year alone, CPJ has already identified at least 1 journalist who has been killed so far in 2021, Lachman Slim, who's a columnist in Lebanon, known for his stance against the Shia political party and Hezbollah. And he had been speaking right before he was killed with a source within Hezbollah who supposedly was going to give him an interview about how they wanted to defect. So again, as I'll stop sharing there and rejoin you in this gallery, just to give you kind of an overview of how important the work of journalists are, and that it is under attack across the globe, and unfortunately, even within our own state. So I'll leave that as kind of food for thought, and we'll hear, I guess, questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hirshon. I guess I'm just going to jump right in. And great. That was a really nice introduction. I'm sure you have lots to say. I wrote down a lot of questions myself, and there's a lot of overlap with what we're doing here. So first of all, just really happy to be here, and I really loved the teach-in and got so much out of it. And so we were all excited to continue this format. And the format's really designed for, we have so many people here on campus who are thinking about all this stuff. And, the threat to democracy in my mind is far from over. That democracy, it's funny, I was talking with a friend today, and he said, well, democracy is an idea. And I'm thinking, well, yes, it is. And it's a good one that I like, but it's actually a set of actions, and it needs to be put into place and reinforced continually, and it can be undermined continually. So it's not something that we just, it was a historian who used to say, the United States is the first country that was created on an idea. And, it's not really true. Yeah, the idea was core to it, but it was also an imperfect democracy from the beginning. But to the degree that it has worked, it's because of the institutions that were set up and the dedication of people to preserving those institutions. So I want to get into sharing a few slides myself, and I hope this is going to be right. Is that working for everybody? Good. I start with the First Amendment, which is the basis for what we have as our Bill of Rights, and what Dr. Hirshon was talking about. And this quote from Thomas Jefferson, and you can find dozens, if not more, of quotes from the people, the so-called founding fathers of this nation, right? That if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be, right? Like, you can't have a free people who live in ignorance. So I'm not going to talk about the educational system, which is another whole angle we could talk about, but what we call the public sphere, which includes the fourth estate, the press, and just the people, the town squares, the town halls, what we're doing right now as part of that public sphere. And I'm going to start with this image because, George Orwell's famous novel, 1984, came out in 1949 after the Second World War, and was really showing how nations like Nazi Germany and totalitarian Soviet Union operated, and it was predicting the future. And I'm actually old enough to have read this book when it was still about the future. It's not about the past. 1984 was written in 49. It's a bit of an overused cliche in our discourse. It's always easy to call someone Orwellian, but this picture is great. And really, because I saw this picture and was instantly reminded of that picture, which is from a old BBC production that I remembered. And I just couldn't help myself but juxtapose these two images. And that, of course, is Trump looking down. The image from 1984 is Big Brother is watching you. And the conceit in that book is that the government controls everything. We don't live in that world, right? The government does not control everything. But, I think it's still useful because we live in a world where we have a right-wing media ecosystem, which is built around talk radio, Fox News, some other newer, more extreme so-called news networks, social media groups, and on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, but also others that are coming out, and based around QAnon and Proud Boys and white supremacist neo-Nazi groups and all of this, that it doesn't have total control over the nation by any means like Big Brother did, but it absolutely has a captive audience of millions of people. And if you live within that media ecosystem, it is really hard to not see the world the way they present it to you. And so I want to talk about that. And then I want to talk about what the effects of that are in terms of the politics today, in particular on the Republican Party. And so, the right-wing media sphere right now has, in 1984, there was the 2 minutes hate. Every day they came on the screen with 2 minutes hate. Well, we have 24/7 hate now. They had 2 + 2 = 5, and the state commanded you to believe that. And not only did you have to say you believed it, you had to really believe it. It's not just ignorance that you're bad at math, it's the deliberate promotion of lies. And then they had this thing called newspeak, which is language designed to obscure or even reverse meaning and eliminate thought. And so Professor Hirshon mentioned fake news, and I won't use that term because the term itself is a propaganda term. There's no such thing, right? It's instantly, you can throw it at something and you don't have to, there's no debate to be had. What are you actually saying? You're just dismissing. And I will show this. This is day one of the Trump administration. And the lying started before that, but on day one, they announced to the people, the American people, you can believe us or you can believe your own lying eyes. Now, on your left is the picture of Obama's inauguration. On your right is the picture of Trump's inauguration. And we say ours was much, much, much larger. And they came up with the term alternative facts to describe this. That is another term of propaganda. It is wrong, and therefore, by saying it, despite the obvious evidence, the estimates are that Obama's was at least 3 times the size of Trump's. But they were announcing from day one, and I paid close attention to this. We are not only are we going to lie, politicians always lie. That's part of what politicians do, but we are going to lie no matter what. And we are never going to back down. And we are going to convince our listeners, our watchers, our people to agree with that lie. Now, whether they really believe it or they love that it makes people like me angry is I don't really know what's all in their minds, right? But the audacity of such a lie became the basis for the Trump administration. So I'm just going to run through a few, current headlines, right? That we have this myth of stolen elections, right? It's actually a lie. It's hard for newspapers to call things lies because that seems biased. But there is absolutely, it was not a stolen election. There's not voter fraud. And so, when Pence, it's not just Trump, his vice president, who is often treated as a reasonable person, is still promoting this as well, as recently as a week ago. We have hundreds of members of Congress, or I think it was 139 in the House, who voted to deny the election certification, and more in the Senate. So we have the core of the Republican Party still promoting this lie. Right? 3/4 of Republicans don't believe Joe Biden won the election, and I have these 2 headlines because Chris Cillizza calls it 3/4 of Republicans believe a lie, right? And the CNN logo there allows the Trump supporter and the Fox News supporter to say, well, that's CNN, that's fake news. So we don't have to engage in that at all. This is a really fascinating New York Times article about how while this was going on January 6th, the social media started promoting the idea that this was Antifa, not Trump supporters. And it started right, and they track it moment by moment, which is really, really powerful to see, and really therefore very difficult to combat. And that's where I'm going to come back to that, right? Some of the consequences from this. All across the country, there's at least 250 laws that on the state level that the Republicans are trying to pass to restrict voting, to make it harder for people to vote. And how can they justify that? Voting is supposed to be what democracy is about. Well, because there's something they call election fraud, right? Which does not exist. And again, the New York Times calls it a myth, which is not wrong, but it's a lie. And how many times can you keep saying that when people won't want to hear it? It's just a random, so not random, but a study of the Trump movement and how many believe his election fraud claims. And, it's 100% practically. Voting shouldn't be easier, right? And it's sort of interesting, right? Why is that? Why is easier voting a bad thing? It doesn't say whether that's, anything about fraud here. And so that's fascinating to me. And then there's views on COVID-19 and other sort of what they call conspiratorial views, although I'm not sure if they're all really, the American way of life is disappearing. They're concerned about that. I don't know that that's conspiratorial or not. But our lives are controlled by secret plots. And by the way, next month we'll be talking, our dialogue will be about conspiracy theories. Now we have, the other consequences of this are about the vaccine, right? And anti-Semitic material, things like global warming and such have had these, these campaigns as well, campaigns of misinformation, of lies, which have real consequences. QAnon is now focusing on coronavirus vaccines, right? QAnon, people who live in a completely different world that is unbridgeable. There's no meeting place really if you're completely in the QAnon world. And of course, it affects all of us in terms of a public health issues, in terms about how many people get the vaccine and whether we reach herd immunity. So I want to talk a bit about that's I didn't really want to, I want to talk about sort of how this threatens democracy. And I want to really make the claim, and I'd love to hear comments, and people feel free to disagree with me, that the Republican Party, since it sits at the center of this, and it is the place where real power is put into place in government, that it must be treated itself as an ongoing threat to the survival of our democratic republic. We Americans don't just disagree politically about policy or the kind of world we want, right? We always have had that. But we have a large portion of the population existing in this right-wing ecosystem that promotes falsehoods as foundational to their worldview. And those falsehoods are being promoted by the Republican Party, right? So as I said, this right-wing media sphere consists of Fox News, there's others, OAN and others. Radio, I didn't mention, Rush Limbaugh really pioneered it, but Sean Hannity and many other more extreme. Radio is a really great medium for appealing to people, to reaching people. It's directly. Major newspapers like the Washington Post, and not Washington Post, Wall Street Journal and New York Post, which may have their value and their assets as journalists, but also serve as part of that media system. And then, as I said, the social media groups. And I also want to throw in there the mainstream media outlets that cannot help but follow what the right-wing media say, because they don't want to appear biased, although that's been changing. And they also are chasing dollars, which is something I'm not going to really talk about today. Both Facebook and the social media and the mainstream corporate media are all chasing eyeballs, chasing dollars, and that's a real danger. And maybe we can get into that in the comments, the discussion. So just a couple more minutes. I just want to, characterize that this right-wing media sphere exists to stir up outrage and hate, to drive and shape emotions and create and reinforce a kind of tribal identity. And it's a tribal identity based upon persecution and victimization. For example, the cancel culture is just the latest. And there's a constant, it's not that the things that they're talking about are necessarily unimportant or even that they're necessarily wrong, right? We can have debates about Dr. Seuss books and all of this. But that the cancel culture, again, becomes a propaganda term. I've seen so many in my, politically correct is another one that instantly kind of dismisses, instantly villainizes the opposition. And, there's stuff, a couple of people I've been reading lately and really shaping my thinking about this, which I can share later if people are interested. But, this media system creates this kind of egoistic voter who wants to disregard other people and who attaches to a larger group, a kind of collective that enables that person, that voter, to frame their selfishness in loftier terms. And this is coming from a scholar of populism. And what strikes me is this might be normal. We might all do this. We all want to think we're good people. We all want to think we're right. We all want to associate with other people who agree with us. And therefore have the support, and we're not just doing, it's not just for me, it's for the good of the nation, it's good of the world, it's good for the good of humanity. But what's dangerous about this particular kind of right-wing populism is that these loftier terms that are offered, the MAGA, America First, the whole Trump message really allows the other side not to see, allows these people to see the other side not just as wrong, like I disagree with the tax rate that you want. I disagree with your environmental policy, but to see the other side as dangerous and illegitimate, right? It's not that they hate Joe Biden. It's not even the whole, he's a socialist or something, whatever bad words you can say about him. Some of them might even be true, right? It's that they say he is not a legitimate president. And this has been burrowing in the Republican Party really since the 90s, when they discovered that the secret to political success for them is to oppose everything that the Democrats stand for and to rally their voters around this. So Trump simply perfected that model that had been growing at least since the 90s. And if the other side is dangerous and illegitimate, then any response is acceptable, even necessary. This therefore, and this scholar says, this populism delegitimizes moral constraints and legitimizes moral nihilism. Anything goes, hence the assault on the Capitol, hence other threats since that, threats to kidnap a governor and execute, right? So my point here, and I'll just sort of close with this, is that within this right-wing media ecosystem, even those Republicans who repudiate violence are supporting a party that accepts and promotes violence, that rejects democracy. And so my line is, there are no good Republicans, right? There may be nice people. They may even want good things. But since they are aligning with a party whose explicit purpose right now is to be an anti-democratic force in American life, this party itself is a threat to the American political experiment that is still ongoing. So I'll throw it back to Professor Munguia, and we'll have some discussion.
Hi, that was so fascinating, and I'm sure controversial for everyone because we have a few questions coming in right away. So I'm going to turn to the students who are raising their hands, and then I'm going to go through the chat questions. So the first student I saw was Lauren Filippini. Do you want to ask your question to Professor McLeod?
Oh, I didn't have a question. I was just like applauding. It was like an applaud emoji.
Wow, very interesting. So maybe I'll start with the chat because we do have some, I think, interesting and also, to me, intuitive reactions from Dean Davis. So Dean Davis, do you want to unmute yourself and read these to the crowd?
Thank you. Actually, I typed them and then said, don't say it from the dean.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I was saying not the dean. I wanted to play devil's advocate a little bit. And so I wanted to push a little bit. So this is just who I am. It's not necessarily my positioning, personal positioning, but I wanted to question the centering of Doer's comments on the Republican Party. And I'm wondering, is it, I often think about this idea of sort of the chicken and the egg, right? So is it the Republican Party that has created this sort of left-leaning, right-leaning, but fictional or attacks on truth? Or is it the fact that there's this corporatization of the media that's driven by the dollars, right? And the desire for people to hear affirming news, of which the Republican Party is sort of, chicken or egg? Is it that the money is driving and Fox News existed before the Republican Party went the way that it did? So I mean, in terms of that, so I wanted to question this idea of, is it really the Republicans or is it that? And then when you made it at the very end, you made a comment about you really centered your argument on the Republican Party, when I think that there is certainly examples of people who are Republicans and vocal and visible Republicans who are countering that narrative of they are not doing fake news. They don't believe it's fake news, that they are factually based. So I just wanted to kind of challenge it a little bit. And I was playing devil's advocate. Thank you, Lucia. I'm the political scientist. I have to challenge you a little bit on it.
Dean Davis, there's nothing I like better than arguing with you. So I'm happy to take that on. And I think I'm going to stick by my point, and how I want to address it is, I have some sympathy for, there are definitely Republicans who are not personally believers in this and who speak out against it. Yet they're stuck in an institution, and I don't know what they should do. To some degree, some are saying we need to fight to take back the Republican Party. Some are saying we need to leave the Republican Party. But I'll just put out right now, like we just had the American Rescue Act, and not one Republican supported it, right? So Mitt Romney, who's often held up as a pillar of decency and moderation, which I dispute anyway, but even if so, voted with Trump 75% of the time, right? So we don't have any bipartisanship coming from Republicans, other than a few voices that say, we are voices of moderation. And again, I'm not disputing them personally, right? I could, but I think they are in a trap. But I think as long as they are, as long as they're supporting an institution like this Republican Party, and what this Republican Party is still bent on doing and has just tried to do, right? And that's why I really think the people who voted to not certify the election are really dangerous people, right? Because there was no case for that. This is far beyond Trump. This is, the core, a strong core of the Republican Party. And this is far beyond, they were using every aspect of the political process, and they were just expressing their rights. Again, it's not just we obstruct the Democrats trying the COVID relief act, a bill or something like that, but we don't accept that this president is legitimate. And so, and as far as Fox News, I think CNN can be criticized in a lot of ways, and they bragged about how much money they made off of Trump in 2016 and how much billions of dollars of free media they gave to him. And that's a great place to investigate how corporate media corrupts the political process and really damages democracy. Fox News has really become almost nothing but propaganda. And they even fired the one person who was willing to tell the truth, the two people, which is in their news desk. And even before the election, I told people, pay attention to the news desk. These are professionals whose job is to follow what they think the data is showing. And those people have been fired. So I don't think there's any room between the propaganda of Fox News and the Republican Party right now. And again, those lonely voices have a real dilemma. But as long as they stay with the Republicans, they are Republicans, and they're doing what that institution does. This is how I see power operating. This is why democracy is not just an idea. It's not just about nice people saying nice things.
Thank you. That was really an interesting back and forth. I think I want to just add another, I'm not going to fully play devil's advocate, but I do want to just, try to defend this idea that perhaps there is hope for the party, right? And perhaps we will see some shift if we see some shift on the other side. Do you think that's possible at all, given the state of the Republican Party? I think we have, I mean, yeah, Mitt Romney voted, right, 75% of the time with Trump, but those really key moments where he stands with society, where he marches in a Black Lives Matter march, and he speaks, about prioritizing scientific data in thinking about restrictions on opening during a pandemic. I think those moments, to me, highlight these places of common ground that are, they shed some light on a hopeful path forward. And perhaps it is the case that, I think as society, we're becoming more open. I can't speak for myself. I'm obviously also, I'm very much in agreement with you, right? I want equality for all. And so it's not even me becoming open, but as a society, people are opening their minds and hearts to going beyond the identity of being a nice person, but really being an actionable, like someone who is taking action in the world, right? So you have not only mothers groups talking about explicitly bringing anti-racist culture into their educational materials, but also just people who have typically kind of ignored listening to the opposite side, opening their minds to that. And to me, I feel like there's a lot of hope that society might pressure the Republican Party to ease up on some of these things, because they are losing so much social support.
So, this is why I think, it's about how power is operating. And that's why it's so important to look at the restriction of voting that's going on. The Republican Party understands right now they are a minority party. The only way to hold on to power is either to change who they are or to restrict voting. And they've chosen to restrict voting. And there's all sorts of structural inequalities built into the Senate, to the Electoral College, even into the House of Representatives, right? Gerrymandering, all sorts of ways. And they're pulling all those levers. I'm not saying one way or another, neither of these parties was made, from above, right? They dropped down on the American people. They both could split. The Democrats have a very strong split that right today feels like, oh, they're doing great. But, there are two very strong groups that don't agree with each other completely. If we had a different structure to our political system, they might be two healthy parties that agreed on a lot, but disagreed on a lot. Similar with the Republicans, and Trump exposed that split, but he's now captured the party. And so mothers joining together and people, and when Mitt Romney says, takes action on the floor, this is why people like Susan Collins, who likes to say she's a centrist also, right? But they say the nice things at home and to the American people, and we say, look at them, we love bipartisanship, we love centrism, oh, that's wonderful. But in fact, they side with the Republican Party. So again, I'm sympathetic to their dilemma. I'm not saying they don't really believe these things, but they're supporting an institution that is undermining democracy. How do you square that, right? And what do they do? I would recommend, if they ask my opinion, vote with the opposition, even if you don't agree with everything, because when you're coming to a bill, you're not voting for the bill that's offered versus the bill you want. You're voting for the bill that's offered or no. And so these Republicans are free to say, we're going to support the Biden administration agenda, even though it's not what we agree, in order to give them a chance, in order to destroy the party, that the people in our party who are obstructing. I'm not saying that's realistic, but that's where it really counts in terms of, and again, I don't think that I'm really making this point because I don't think we should let them off the hook. Again, it's not personal. It's just this party itself is against democracy.
And I just want to quickly add there, if I can, that I think the press plays this sort of uncertain role in all of that, because I think a lot of the opinions that you're expressing, a lot of journalists may feel, and I've had conversations with fellow journalists or journalism students over the last few years during the Trump administration, especially, where this whole debate over, do we call Donald Trump a liar? He's saying things consistently that are not true. We're fact checking him. But it's against our instinct as journalists. The way that I've been trained is to be objective and to never, well, he might he said something that's not untrue, but it's an untruth. It's a falsehood. It's not a lie. How do we know that, morally in his heart, he knows that this is untrue? And it really gets to, I think, sort of journalists, they get frustrated about this, but then they also feel that they're hampered by the traditional rules of journalism. And then, of course, being accused of, journalists are thin-skinned, and so they don't like being accused of being partisan. And that's a whole issue in and of itself. How do we police that?
It's a challenge for them. And I think the journalists have done, in a lot of ways, a very good job with that. But I can be critical as well. I get it, that if you call a lie, you're seen as being unobjective. It's a challenge. And the Trump administration understood that.
Mm-hmm. He took advantage of that, certainly. Mm-hmm.
There's a student question from Liz Mary Luna, and I think it's going to be directed to both of you, but primarily Dr. Hirshon. So Liz Mary, would you like to raise your question now?
There you go. Got it. Sorry, couldn't unmute myself. Hi, I'm Liz Mary Luna. I am the treasurer of WPSPJ, but my question is, I'm also a student journalist, so some of the frustrations that Dr. Hirshon was talking about, I have felt it within my own family as well, so it's kind of hard to try to show my parents to look objectively, not only look towards one side. My question is, how would the press fight back against these sort of fake news attacks that Dr. McLeod was saying? How would they fight back? Basically, how can the press fight back?
I'll give a quick answer here. Thank you, Liz Murray, for the question. I'll give a quick answer here, and then Dr. McLeod will pass it on to you. I kind of tell students often the best we can do as journalists is just keep reporting the truth. Keep doing your job the right way, be a symbol for what the rest of the profession can do, remind the public that journalists play this pivotal role in our democracy and can do so much good for us. I think we do see that in times of crisis, the pandemic, like they're going out there and getting information that none of us want to get or know how to get, but is very valuable for us, right? How do I book a vaccine appointment? What measures do I take to keep myself safe? If we keep acting that way, I would hope that then those fake news attacks fall on deaf ears, right? Like, they really accusing person of fake news, but I know them of doing all these good things, in the community. So I think that if you just keep doing good work, because journalists also don't really want to get too much into the fray. And when they defend themselves, then it becomes that partisan issue that I was raising before. Oh, of course, they're, siding with the Democratic point of view and all of that. But do you have thoughts on that too, Dr. McLeod?
I think it's a real challenge. And I think the journalism profession, needs to look at itself and this objectivity. And, as a scholar, I have the same, as a historian, I really lay out at the beginning of, I'm very clear about my perspective, because I can't pretend I haven't learned anything. And my frustration with journalists is they report something as if nothing's ever happened before this article, right? And so, I've drawn conclusions. As a scholar, I'm always open to changing and love that, right? Or at least I hope to be, but I also have my own values and perspectives and such. And I always, try to be open about that and say others are welcome to, I'm not trying to persuade you to agree with me on these things. But I think people like Jay Rosen's work in journalism, he has this thing called the view from nowhere, that journalists act as if they really don't, they're above. It's not even objective. It's just they don't exist, And, I teach my students that we're just to write a sentence, you are making a choice about what to say, what not to say. So you're already making choices. In history, for example, there's no objective story of the past. I do think it's a challenge. And I do think, what you were saying about avoiding I think one of the things that's impressive with Biden is that he doesn't get into these attacks. Like, these attacks are going to come constantly. And because they work, because they fuel, and it's interesting to, my monitoring, very distant monitoring of Fox News right now, is they don't have anything really to talk about except for Mr. Potato Head's genitals, because they don't want to talk about the real world. And they need to keep their audience enraged. And so how long will that last? How long will their ratings last? Right, these sorts of things. So I do think journalists need to really investigate their aloofness and this sense of we are doing the great work of the fourth estate, and that, you know, all of us do, right? And then that they are in the mud with the rest of us. And what does that mean? But at the same time, no, you're going to be attacked. Like there's a New York Times journalist who's being attacked regularly by Tucker Carlson right now on Fox News. And it's not easy. It's, you know, jail and all of that is also a potential threat, right? Trump called the press the enemies of the people. That is a code phrase, which is, you know, a step away from arrest, camps, death, right? That's where that phrase goes to.
So we have one more student, a comment, I think an observation. Angela, would you like to share your observation with the group on this matter?
Okay, sorry, I was having trouble unmute. What I sent was I have two family members, and my family, and whenever these fake news accusations that President Trump and that like the Republican Party pushed, with how far it has gone in their eyes, all these things are seen kind of as an ultimate truth to them, and having anything that goes against this is as seen as anything beyond the truth.
It's a cult-like bubble, right? And again, like it's not that it can't be broken, and it's not that it's inevitable. And some of it has to do with this sort of technology, as well as the you know, the economics of social media that really fought. You know, YouTube just took down 30,000 videos yesterday with COVID misinformation. You know, that's just one topic. There's 30,000. Who even knew there would be that many videos on YouTube that are just misinformation? There's also the international stuff, you know, the Russian stuff and all of that. You know, I don't really know what to do about that. You know, and so I'm talking about the level of the sort of corridors of power, not in the household, right? And Lucy, you were going more towards that, and I agree that that's a big part of that's the public square is in the home as well. So I don't dismiss that at all.
I think there's just a huge role at this point. The misinformation about the credibility of our news sources is so deeply ingrained in American culture that I feel like the task is not an obligation only of the journalists, right? It is of anyone who is deeply committed to truth. And that is all of us have some solidarity in this matter. Professors, students, people you see, you know, out there in the world and talk about issues with. And so I do think, like, if you see something on social media, you don't have to sacrifice yourself and say, like, you're wrong, but just say, what is the evidence for this? What is the evidence for this? Or one thing I have really noticed, I love that both of you harped onto this term, fake news as propaganda in itself. I utterly despise this term. So if a student brings it up, I teach them about framing effects. I say, look, let's imagine I am applying for a job and I take a survey in this group. I'm like, how many of you really liked this experience? And, you know, 51% of you say yes. 49% of you say no, but there's only like 12 of you in here, okay? I have a choice. How do I present this information? Well, if I'm pro-Lucy, I'm obviously going to say that a majority of my class really enjoyed this experience. If I'm anti-Lucy, I'm going to say there was a noteworthy percentage, I'm going to say 49% of the class really disliked this, right? And you can do this exercise with anything that comes out in your social media. Go to Fox News, go to NBC and compare the headlines. You see the same debate being reported, except in one, an opponent is crushing someone's liberal agenda, right? In the other, someone's telling misinformation. So just present opposing information. I don't think that's the solution, but a little solidarity from everyone in our culture, I think, is just required at this point, because the assault is just, it has been very successful.
I actually disagree strongly with that, a useful strategy.
Well, that's great. Let's talk about that.
Of one's time, because those kinds of, I did it once because it was somebody commented, it was actually about COVID, and they started saying, I was like, I said, where is your evidence? And then they came back with some study. And since I know how to read studies, I went and looked, and it was from 2015, blah, blah, blah. And I start like, oh, good, let me just, and they just came back and said the exact same thing. And I realized like and I know, like, I don't do this because there are bots that are there. There are trolls that I don't know that anybody has ever been persuaded by a discussion thread on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And there's very much better use of my time, and I think all of our time. You could get into a place where people really want to talk openly, but it is not the social media.
And just quickly on that point, to all of our students, I would encourage you, check out a website, firstdraftnews.org, which fights disinformation. And so if you're ever unclear about a certain website you go to and you don't know, is this just a troll, some fake sort of a bot started by a political movement, or they have a lot of tools, again, firstdraftnews.org. And they have different things for all of you to kind of figure out before you click share, right? Because that's like this scourge that people on Facebook just don't even read the story, just see the headline and like, I agree with that point, share. They kind of give you some tips about how you can evaluate. Look at the author of this article. Does it have no name listed as an author? Does it say it's by staff? That's suspicious. Does it have a name that seems like a very common name, like Joe Smith or something? That's a little suspicious. Kind of seeing other aspects. Does it have a URL that is very similar to like a major American legacy media organization? It's like, ABC News, not just ABC News. Like, that's something you should look at. So all of those different things, you start to become a more informed news consumer. And I think that's, kind of to Lucy's point before about not just journalists taking this under, right? It's like a media literacy for all of us. And that we're now, even if a lot of us here will never go on to be journalists, but you can direct people to that, or at least for yourself, you'll know how to kind of differentiate.
I think that's, for the last decade or so, even before the Trump movement and such, I started realizing like my major job as a college professor is teaching sort of how to find, assess, use information efficiently. And that's why, like, I use the term efficiently, because that's why engaging on social media is, to me, it's not that it's wrong, but it's not an efficient use of time, because there's so many other things that we need to do. We all have 24 hours in a day. But that's what my class is, there's embedded in that is, and I appreciate the source because I haven't seen that one, but there's other ones that teaching the tools just to pause and to scrutinize. And it's usually pretty easy to find pretty quickly if you choose to get a sense of where this is coming from.
I think we have an observation and a question. So Kaya, if you want to share your agreement, I think you just typed in some observations that demonstrate that, and then we'll turn to Riley's question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I agree with what you were saying, Professor, because I feel like social media is the #1 leading place where misinformation is spread. And I can just scroll through Facebook like for 5 seconds and completely like I can just look up, I can fact check what they're saying by like 1 click and completely fact check their information. And so I just agree. And I just wanted to say that I know what Professor McLeod is saying, that he doesn't think that that's like a good use of his time. During the presidential election, I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw a lot of misinformation, and I would just reply with articles that were fact checking that information. So it's like really easy to do. But I do agree that it's like, they're not going to be, they usually don't even answer me. Like they know that they're wrong and then they just don't answer me. So sometimes there's no point in doing so.
I think it's a real challenge, to speak across this divide, right? To heal whatever the words we want to use, and to restore a sense of public space. And that's why my focus right now is, I'm not a Democrat. It's not that I think the Democrats are wonderful, but right now within our political system, that is where change is happening. And that's where if the Democrats win, it'll force the Republicans to change. And they may be they'll either die or they will change. And there's no reason they can't be the good guys, right? They can't shift to support what I like even more than Democrats. None of these things are fixed. And just, it is difficult. How do I talk to the family member? How do I talk to, and I get that frustration with my solution is don't. And I'm not really saying don't, but, things are so stratified in a way that, we haven't seen since the 1960s. I would guess, and maybe even more so than that.
Well, and I just would add, remember, again, from the journalism perspective, our goal is never to persuade people, really, right? It's just to tell them the truth, and as close as we can get to truth and accuracy, right? Which is a little bit of a unicorn, but we try. And I just think that that's, most important is that we may never, Kaya, some of these people that you see on social media, we're not going to convince them. We don't even know if they're real, right? Or they're some bot or whatever it is. But if you just go out into the world as this adherent to media literacy, and you are able to just mention your own feelings on that, I think people don't feel attacked when you're not questioning them. You're just saying I saw a story the other day and I checked into it and it really wasn't accurate. And Dr. McLeod's story right there about that was a study about COVID. Oh, really? It was from 2015, folks. So I think just hearing that, it's he didn't attack anybody necessarily. He's just him finding that out and spreading that to us might make me a little bit more the next time I see a story about some COVID study, I want to look at the data of that. So I think that can be an effective strategy.
Yeah, and
I want to echo that. And before we turn to Riley's question, which I think is really important, but I very briefly want to echo that and say, be sure you're also doing it to your own side, right? So right now, I'm sorry, but many of us should be really calling out people like Cuomo, right? Because we would be doing it on the other side really incessantly. And when those first claims, they were disputed, but then, and eventually, I guess, shown to be false, were put out there about that time presidential candidate Joe Biden about a similar incident. Many people, I saw such hypocrisy, right? Oh, it couldn't be. And I'm if it happened on the other side, we would immediately believe it. And so it's this idea that you're demonstrating a willingness to suspend judgment and publicly display your process of seeking belief with a commitment to truth that I think is just so important in the public sphere. Even if you land on the belief that does feel better for you, you have to show that process. You have to be open to being wrong before you discover the truth. You can't just go into it, right, and assume that you're right on to the truth because your intuition is telling you something. So I don't know. I just want to echo that, Nick.
Can I just make one comment on that? It's a great point. For me, an issue that can, it's not just the truth versus falsehood, but whether you dive into something, because those are really fun, right? And next month is conspiracy theories, but it doesn't have to be conspiracy theories. And I saw, there's the Russia story fascinates me on some level because we know a lot. We know a bunch of facts, and it's been certified by different intelligence agencies, by a Senate committee that was chaired by Republicans. That is the Trump-Russia connection. And there's a lot of speculation. And then there's a lot of other stuff. So I saw some article yesterday about Republicans who went to Russia on July 4th, 2018. I must have missed this story. And my eyes and it's not a new story, but I just said, you know what? I'm gonna just not go down that, because I know it's one of those places where there's so much speculation. It could fuel me and make me feel yeah. Because I do think there's more to that story. My suspicion is, I can be like anybody else. My suspicion is. But at first I chose not to spend a lot of time just getting into sketchier and sketchier kind of websites that are speculating, but also just trusting that there are people who are really, this is really important, and it is real. But I'm going to let the people who are really working on that continue to do their work and stay with the people that I kind of know and trust. I don't need to be out ahead of that and screaming, from the mountaintops, like, look, didn't you know about Russia and Trump and all of this stuff? But again, like it can emotionally gratify me to say, see, and so it's not just right wingers who want to pursue their selfish ends and be with a group that agrees with them in order to feel good about what they're doing. It's not just right wingers that necessarily want that.
So technically we're about 5 minutes over, but I really want to get to Riley's question and then we'll be wrapping up the dialogue. So Riley, will you share your question with the group?
Yeah, I just I wanted to ask, especially there with Kai, you were talking about trying to bridge the divide and whatnot. I said, and my question was, how can you expect people to try and be objective and bridge that divide? You just gave a whole presentation that ended with there are no good Republicans. How can you expect people after listening to something like that to want to actually bridge that divide?
Yeah, I should have said in office. And again, I meant not that they're good people or bad people, but that the institution, they're working for an institution that is undermining democracy. Right. So, and I think it's a challenge for Republican voters too, that you are supporting a party, and I don't hold them responsible in the same way, but each of us is responsible. But I really, I should amend that to say there are no good Republicans in office, right? Politicians in the party structure. Again, they might be wonderful people, good parents, good neighbors, all these things, right? Tip well. And help little old ladies across the street, but they're working for an institution that is undermining American democracy, and that is, I think, an ongoing problem that needs to be faced.
Well, with that, tidbit, I think I'm gonna go ahead and thank our panelists, and you can join me in doing that. Self-applaud. And also all of the people who have joined in the dialogue this evening. I really hope you attend our next dialogue on conspiracy theories next month. And feel free to continue this by emailing any of us. Thank you so much to Ian Marshall, James, Miles, and also Tia Cherry for all of the logistical support you've provided us this evening. And we will be sure to send out an announcement and a reminder of our next dialogue.
Thank you.